Good evening, everyone. Excellent. Thank you. My name is Adam Lashinsky. I'm the executive editor of Fortune magazine. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. This event is being Facebook live streamed on Facebook Live, however the cool kids say it. We're going to discuss Pivot to the Future, which is a book and a podcast. One of the authors of the book, Omar Abash of Accenture, is here to talk with his podcast co-host, will.i.am. Gentlemen? Lovely to see both of you. Good evening.
Oh, good evening. It's good to see you too.
Omar, let's start with you. Pivot to the future. Pivot is a word in Silicon Valley that is very popular, almost cliche, because it's what startups do when they're failing. They pivot. Now, I don't think that's where you're going with Pivot to the Future, but it's probably not that far off either. So why don't you start by telling everyone at a sort of, the 60,000-foot level what it means to you?
Yeah, you're right, actually. It's not a million miles away from, what we were thinking. I'm trying to remember back to the very first time we used the word, but it was essentially saying every company has become successful and created something called now its core business. But eventually, the world around it changes, innovation proceeds, and new ways of doing things emerge. And the question is, will you make it from the core business into the new business? And that's the pivot. And so we talk about the wise pivot and how to pull that off.
I'm going to ask you to keep going because what I think is interesting about your use of pivot, as I understand it, is that, I joked about Valley startups, but it's true. When they pivot, it's because what they were doing wasn't working. And they go, right, student body left, we're going to do something different now. We are going to pivot. And you're far more nuanced about it. You're saying you establish companies that have been successful at something. You don't necessarily have the luxury of stopping doing what you're doing, right? So would you explain that?
No, exactly right. In fact, you can't stop doing what you're doing. This idea that I'm going to leave the legacy or leave the old behind, we're saying is wrong. So one of the concepts in business that people talk about is business transformation, which says, hey, I've got a position in the market. I don't like it anymore. I'm going to transform my business and get to a different position. And we're saying that doesn't work because by the time you get there, innovation has moved on again. So actually you have to be in the habit of recognizing that innovation is a long-run game. You need to embed it deeply in every aspect of your business, whether it's the old part, the now part, or the new part, and have a whole series of continual pivots in the business to allow it to evolve over time. And actually, you see that dynamic in startups and in big corporations.
Now, we're going to have plenty of time to dig into examples because that's the meat of your book is examples and the interviews that you've done. But first, you said something interesting just now that you want companies or you believe companies should be thinking about their legacy, where they need to go. But I think you used the word the now also. And that may seem obvious, but I think it's worth talking about. What's the now?
Yeah, so put yourself in 2014. So in 2014, there's a giant retail company that, is good, it's huge, everyone knows about it, but it's being Amazon like everybody else. Or in 2014, a giant big technology company, massive franchise on everybody's desktop, doing well, but it's not the cool kid in town. It's not where the best developers want to be. Fast forward 5 years, and Walmart and Microsoft are in a completely different position from where they were then. Walmart acquired Jet.com and actually cracked the code on e-commerce in the US. We could talk about how and why, but that's their now business. E-commerce is the now business that's taken off in a big way, and actually they're giving Amazon a good run for their money. Microsoft's now business is the cloud business. So their legacy business of Windows, Outlook, they put that on iOS. Unthinkable. Like allowing their core to be on their competitors' platforms and creating investment fuel from that legacy business to power up the now business of cloud and Azure, which has taken off.
Good. So, Will, I know that you are sort of a living embodiment of a pivot. but everyone in the room might not necessarily know that. Most people will probably know about your musical career. So tell everybody about your first pivot in your career, if you will, your pivot from music to business.
Well, that was my second pivot.
Then excuse me for interrupting you. Then tell us about your first one.
First pivot was getting out of the projects and going from poverty and staying away from what was the normal way of making money, and that is hustling. And I'm glad I pivoted away from that path, because that seemed to be the thing that, the youth at the time, that was the path for us. And then I started this group called the Black Eyed Peas, which was this melting pot. We reflected LA. We were Black, we were Filipino, we were Mexican. And our whole thing was to not do the norm, which at the time was gangster rap, and do like progressive hip hop, positive music. That, yes, I could have talked about the conditions of my neighborhood, but I wanted to paint different stories and reflect the schools that I went to and the optimism and the encouragement that was given towards me. And we were like that edgy backpack jazz hip hop group. We were comfortable. We made money. At least we thought we were making a lot of money at the time. And then we pivoted. And then we changed the member of the group. We added a member of the group and changed the name from Black Eyed Peas to the Black Eyed Peas. And that was intentional. Like, no, now we're the Black Eyed Peas. And now we're just back to Black Eyed Peas.
And by the way, excuse me, in your first, your first entrepreneurial innovation was the way you just described it is really profound, because there was another model that was working.
Yeah.
In the hip hop world, that was working for a lot of artists.
But I remember what the day that it hit me. We were in Santa Barbara, and some girl says, "Come to a dorm room party." So I was like, "Sure, let's go." So we went to the dorm room party, and they're playing one of our songs that we just recorded last week. And I'm like, "Yo, how did you get Weekends?" She was like, I was like, "App, did you bring the CD?" He was like, "Well, you never gave me the song." I'm like, "How did you get this song?" She was like, "What are you talking about? I got it off Napster." I was like, "What the F's Napster?" Like, what's Napster? I remember I was like in Santa Barbara, in the dorm room, like asking this girl, "What is Napster? I never heard of it. And how did you get my song?" And that's when I realized, like, our world's changed, because we were a college group. We started our group at LMU, Loyola Marymount University, at the Lion's Den. That's how we started. Our whole mission was, let's play for college kids. And when Napster came, I realized that yeah, we could sell multiple House of Blues, but we're not selling records. And that's when it switched for me. And when we pivoted and changed the kind of music, how we were writing it. So I managed the group and wrote the content, and we got to a place where Apple wanted us to help them launch iPods and iTunes. And my inquisitive mind asked, like, how much did it cost to develop this product? And I know what you would be paying us if you guys were paying us money, but you just gave us laptops, but that's cool. I wanted a new laptop anyway. We'll do the commercial. And that's when I realized, like, okay, this technology stuff this is where it's at. So then we launched VCast for Verizon. Then we launched, XM radio. Then we did the, Nokia comes with music. Like, we were the tech company. People came to us because we were safe.
Let me get you to you were safe. Let me get you to slow down on your story, because you sort of describe your journey as having these series of epiphanies where you're going along doing one thing, and then you realize what's going on here, which was that your group had an opportunity to do something more. This is what you're describing with Apple and with Verizon. So, and I think what you're describing is that you had you were open, right? Which I think businesses that are trying to change need to be open. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, and at the time, in 2003, 4, like the relationship between band and technology companies, that wasn't, no one did that. If anything, the only commercial that a band would do was like maybe a Sprite commercial, or well, thanks to Sting, a car commercial, with the Jaguar commercial. Like, there was taboo to do commercials. And so we were like...
Excuse me, because you were selling out. Is that
Well,
why it was taboo?
Well, selling out really truly means to sell outside of what you're supposed to be selling, and that is records and CDs, because the record company was the manufacturer of records and CDs and distributor. So a sellout is you're selling outside of what you're supposed to be selling. Like, an artist could have been signed to Cadillac. Like, Motown could have been called Cadillac Records because they had radios in their cars. Mm-hmm. And nowadays what you're seeing is that companies are content companies too. And we're in a couple of minutes before someone signed directly to Amazon or signed directly to Apple. Right? Stranger Things is a series that's directly from Netflix. Right? So, right, content and company is just, it goes hand to hand.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to pause because we're going to save some of your current business career for a little bit later in the conversation. Omar, he's a tough act to follow, so we're gonna get a little whiplash. But I want to come back to your book, and by way of getting to your podcast that the two of you are working on together. But I think what I'd like you to share with everybody is that you're a consultant and you've developed a format, a framework for thinking about some of these things, and you like the number 7. And would you share with people why you like the number 7?
Sure. Although I don't know how deliberate that was, but you're right. There's a couple of chapters in the book. One which is about the 7 wrong turns, things that business people can get wrong, and one around the 7 winning strategies, things to get right.
Since I'm a journalist, let's start with the 7 wrong turns.
Yeah, I thought you'd like those. I mean, what we basically get at is to say, how can successful companies go wrong? Like, what is it that, eludes them? Will and I were talking in the last couple of days about, when Blockbuster were there, we're like, was the board dumb? No. Nokia, Kodak, was there an issue around lack of knowledge, lack of anything? And the answer is no, not really. But people make mistakes. They overly follow short-term Wall Street needs and demands, sometimes at the expense of the longer-term game plan. They fixate on regulators more than they fixate on customers. They run the machine too lean, so that when the time to invest and renew is needed, there's not enough capacity to do that. Those are some of the things that go wrong, and they're example after example after example.
All right, let me back you up on the 2 last ones because they're so interesting. I'm gonna play devil's advocate. You say focus on your customer, not on the regulator. Well, that's easy to say unless you've got a regulator up in your business and they're giving you major grief. And some companies run too lean. That's easy to say unless you don't happen to have any money on your balance sheet and you have no choice but to run lean.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't want to pretend any of this is easy. And in fact, in the book, we're incredibly clear that it's not easy.
Great.
But in general, if your customers like you, the regulator is not on your back. That's generally how it works. The converse is also true. So actually solving for the customer makes it much easier to defend whatever it is you're doing with a regulator. And the opposite is true. When it comes to cost, I mean, of course, every business has to be super efficient. You have to have operational excellence. You have to run lean. But what we've learned is when the pace of innovation is accelerating and constantly accelerating, then you better have the financial wherewithal to invest in your future. Because if you don't, you are going to become obsolete. And in this world, if you stand still, the world just proceeds along past you.
Okay, so favorite example of that from the book?
Of someone who didn't invest or
Either one. I mean, no, I think you'd rather talk about someone who could have gone lean but spent in a risky way and succeeded for it.
I mean, so the ultimate example of all time of that has got to be Amazon. I mean, and I don't know exactly what Jeff Bezos would say if he'd gone back to him in 1996 and said, can you imagine that you'd be building the development environment and infrastructure, IT infrastructure for the whole world? Maybe the answer would have been no.
It's funny. I thought for sure, and this is just my own bias, that you were going to say Apple because in 97, 98, the company wasn't doing so well and Jobs spent a ton of money. Anyway, here's my challenge to you about Amazon. I think no one should be allowed to use Amazon as an example of anything because you're not Jeff Bezos and you're never go. He's a freak of nature. That company is a freak of nature. So give me another one.
Okay. So I agree that is a freak of nature. And I agree. And you can't
take anything away from them. I mean, amazing execution, but.
And deliberate strategy.
Yeah, sure.
Which is incredible.
Agreed.
But no, I mean, so if I think about a company like Schneider Electric, who we feature in the podcast.
Great.
This company is 180, I think, something years old. It started in pig iron. Today they make software for industrial automation and for energy management and home management control systems. So this has been through multiple pivots over its lifetime. If you go back to the beginning of the tenure of the current chairman and CEO, they were essentially a hardware company. They made fixed hardware for plant, for grid networks, for homes. But they got the idea that actually hardware, you put software in it, you connect it to the web, you build services on top of those, and you completely evolve the nature of the business. And so that's a company that's more in the realm of maybe not the extreme outliers like Amazon that has pivoted.
Okay, before we move on, give everyone your favorite winning strategies that people didn't learn in business school. That it's going to be fresh meat for them, as it were.
All right, I'll pick on a couple. So one of the things that we looked at, the heart of it basically says, look, innovation is where disruption comes from. Specifically, innovation running into an existing business model causes disruption if the existing business model doesn't adapt and absorb that innovation. So we looked at the habits of the best innovators and what is it that they do. And one of the things that is a winning strategy is around it being extremely hyper-relevant to customers. What do I mean? It means that customers don't buy what you advocate because you brand it and advertise. They buy what you experience. Because if they have an amazing experience, then they'll buy you. And so when companies like a Disney think hard about, you go and visit the parks and they give you your magic band and the band knows where you are and you can input via various mechanisms, your app or on a kiosk, whatever, what is you need, and you show up at the restaurant with the screaming kids and the food is brought to you, not waiting in a long queue. That's thinking about the experience that you want to have and it bonds you to them. So that hyper-relevance is one of the ones I like a lot. The other one is around technology. I think a lot of us grew up in the business world with an idea that technology was an enabler. So you have your business strategy and then IT and technology will follow. Actually, what we're learning is if you're going to be a successful bank, you better be amazing at technology. If you're going to be a successful insurer, you better be amazing at technology. And so the best companies put technology in the forefront and actually the top leaders engage with it and they get it.
You're pretty good at this because I think this is a good segue for your podcast co-host. Explain, Will, what your embrace of technology and what you're doing with that in your career right now.
So in my journey, I realized that every time there's a natural disaster or someone wants to bring awareness to a product or a presidential candidate, they call musicians to either sell it, raise money, and bring awareness. And in the ghettos that reflect the ones I come from, they don't address the everyday tsunami with neglect and no preparation for kids to lead tomorrow. And so I would tell our kids when I started my school that they should aim their passion towards science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So the reason why I went into a tech career and became an entrepreneur, used my own money, built the product, and then raised money is to show the kids at my school that we can do this too. Because there's no one that they can model themselves after. And for me to be like, yo, you guys need to dream down this path, and then they just see me only on stage, they'll be like, you're lying, Will, I am. Well, I want to do music. No, you don't want to do music. You don't. You want to do this. And music is great, but it's not going to change our community in the way that how we need it to be changed with the coming times. Right? there's a bigger investment in AI than there is in HI, human intelligence. I know because I raised, a whole lot of money in AI over the course of 6 years. And if you take the $117 million that we raised for AI over 6 years and the $10 million that we raised in human intelligence over 10 years, that goes to show you where the interest is in the hearts and the minds of our society. And the only folks that are going to get hurt by that are the people that are in developing communities. And so that's the reason why I'm so passionate to get this right and pivot as many times as I can. I feel like freaking Curry on the freaking court right now.
That's a sensitive topic at this particular moment.
What, are they losing?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
He's a fan.
Yeah, that's the reason why. Like, who would have thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being in the projects that you'll have a team building, conversational artificial intelligence the way that we have. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and we still have some ways to go before we launch. It's been 6 years, and it's hard work.
So when you talk about $117 million raised in
Over 6 years
and launching, you're talking about your technology company specifically, right?
Yeah.
Before you talk about that, would you describe how you came to invest in Beats? And is that your best investment ever? Financial investment.
So financially, I don't know if anybody put money in Beats to start Beats as far as myself and Jimmy Dre. It was an idea. So I come home from tour and I tell Jimmy in 2006, Jimmy, we need to make our own hardware. We need to make our own hardware. Like, why are we using our music to sell everybody else's stuff? Let's make our own stuff. And Jimmy says, Will, you know why they call it hardware? It's because it's hard. I was like, I know, Jimmy, but let's just do our own stuff. And then a year later, he says, I was walking down the beach with Dre, and his manager wants him to sell sneakers. And I told him, let's sell speakers. And so you want to be a part of it? I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do? I just need your brain and your excitement. I need you to bounce ideas off for us to get it right. Let's have some fun. And that's what it was. My deliverables as far as what my commitments were, nothing. My contract as far as exclusivity, nothing. We did it because we loved it. And people would come to me at the height of Beats telling me to make headphones. I was like, no. My attorney was like, but your contract doesn't say you can't. I was like, so what? I'm Beats. I'm a part of Beats, but your name's not on the box. People don't even know you're part of it. So what? My equity shows me that I do. And I'm going to do my part. And if doing my part is to stay loyal and to add and to be the best partner, where if they need me in front, I'll be in front. If they need me in the back, but they need my brain, I'm going to add my brain. And when times got, there was a point where everyone else wanted to do headphones. And Jimmy was pissed when another rapper had a pair of headphones. And I said, Jimmy, this is going to continue to happen. We need to sign people to a headphone deal. He was like, what's a headphone deal? I was like, what's a record deal? If you could tell me what a record deal truly is, when we're not the distributor anymore, it's on iTunes as a license, and then people download it, or it's on YouTube. That's not a record deal. We're not in the record. It's not just recording and you distribute it anymore. So a headphone deal is giving artists a SKU of a headphone, and they give them a royalty, where they participate in hardware. And from that came Gaga Beats, the Bieber Beats, and the Nicki Minaj Beats. And so the pieces that I added, I added perspective where I added, and we grew the company with the leadership of Luke, who's awesome, who was a music exec, by the way. But we were music execs. And we took the market share of Panasonic and Sony and, Shure and Sennheiser, all the freaking headphone companies, and we grew a big freaking brand. But I don't remember putting any money in.
Okay. Omar, I'm not going to call Will a freak of nature, to his face, because I can say that about somebody like Jeff Bezos behind his back. But what we're seeing here is an original thinker and how an original thinker builds a business. But what you're focused on in particular are companies that have something, and their job isn't necessarily to come up with some brand new idea, but to unlock what they have. And I know you talk about the concept of trapped value. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, the logic is that as the pace of innovation accelerates, the potential value you can create from innovation grows. It turns out that the actual value creation that companies create from applying innovation is much less. And in fact, the two curves are diverging because the rate of innovation is accelerating. And that gap is trapped value because it's very attractive to any innovator or any disruptor to say, hey, I'm going to go and apply that innovation, solve a problem better, faster, cheaper than the incumbents, and create value. That's what trapped value is about.
So you two are doing a podcast. Why?
Why don't you start?
One, after the first session, I was like, wow, okay, this is going to be pretty cool and fun to do. I didn't know how people were going to experience it after they listened to it, but it was fun to do. And then our second session.
Who was your first session with? Sorry.
Our first session was with a company that went from the third industrial revolution and still around in the fourth industrial revolution. That you mentioned, Schneider.
The one that Omar spoke about. Yep.
And then our second session was with the CEO of Verizon. Ooh, can we say that? Okay, cool. I don't know. I don't know if I'm supposed to disclose it.
You pronounced it perfectly.
But after that session, I'm like, yo, I don't know if the podcast's enough because this could turn into a series on visually. Like I could see this on Netflix. Like, this is informational. This can inspire kids in school. This can inspire business folks that are in tough situations on what decisions they should make. This is needed right now. Two different perspectives, two different sides of the world, where he comes from, where I come from, and leading an amazing team at Accenture, a huge company, and then where I come from and showing you what's possible. The inspiration, the opportunity that this is going to create for unlocking the stifled mind of folks that don't want to do it, that are fear-led. I think this podcast is going to do something in culture.
What's one thing you learned from the CEO of Verizon, or one thing that you asked that surprised you?
Oh, that was.
There's a couple of good ones.
So I had him break down 5G, and for all the listeners, because I was anticipating the people that were listening don't really know what 5G is and all the pieces that have to come together for 5G to be 5G.
Well, I talk to people about this all the time, and I have no idea whatsoever.
Yeah, you're gonna have to listen to the podcast.
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead, please.
No, I'm not gonna say it. You got to listen to the podcast. But it's and what it's gonna do for society. Right? What comes after 5G deployment?
Okay.
You can't have autonomous cars on the freeway with the technology we have right now. You can't have somebody making operations with the technology we have now. There has to be no latency. You can't have virtual reality experiences with the technology that we have right now because you're going to get dizzy and feel car sick because it has to be real. As you turn, it has to feel the way it feels in real life. So, and there's a couple of components that make 5G 5G. And there's some networks that say it's 5G and then other networks that say it's not. And then in China and America and chip makers and handheld makers and the folks that are putting out.
The heart of it, Adam, is when we started talking, we realized that we both love the application of technology in business and society.
You and Will, you mean?
Yeah, and we're both on the optimistic end of it. So we're wide open to what can happen. But actually, the story that's coming out of these series that we're in is actually all these big business leaders who are successful have a right balance of how do they apply technology and innovation to make their business perform and drive societal progress in a way that's appropriate for their brand and their company. And that's one of the coolest things about it so far.
Yeah, we talked about spectrum, the purchasing of spectrum. We talked about AI in the classroom. how to deploy this technology to, the unconnected. It was a really, really awesome interview. I walked away, inspired, encouraged to do more. Like, this guy's an amazing leader. And that company's been through so many changes recently. Friends of mine that work there, like Tim Armstrong, what up?
Because he's watching live right now.
No, Tim is that's like family.
I understand.
Yeah. What
Now,
up, Tim?
So, but Omar, I'm curious what you hope to accomplish with the podcast. So, because podcasting has become very popular, and there's a small handful that are very well listened to, and I would guess there's probably thousands or tens of thousands that aren't. I get, by the way, why it would be fun for the two of you to interview a business executive together, but what's the goal is my question.
I think very simply, when we at Accenture and my colleagues and I are out and about talking to customers, everyone is grappling with this issue of digital AI technology. What does it mean for my business?
Yeah.
And actually, what the goal is to show people, hey, this is highly manageable. There are great examples out there of companies who are managing it, who are being successful with it. It's not hopeless. It can be very inspiring. You can do great good for your people, for your shareholders, for the wider stakeholders of society around you. And let's go and talk about the examples of people who are doing it. That's the reason.
Let me. You said something interesting, that both of you are technology optimists, which I totally understand. In any hot topic on technology right now, there's a pessimistic side. So artificial intelligence, the machines are going to take over. They're going to ruin everybody's job. 5G is a big hype thing. People are going to spend a lot of money, but nothing's really happening so far, etc. Give us your vision of number one, how those technologies are going to change life and business, and number two, why we should be optimistic and not pessimistic.
So my number one answer to that is track record. In human history, from the invention of the wheel onwards, every technology has a side effect. The ship and the shipwreck, the plane and the plane crash, the internet and cyber warfare. The question is, would you rather not have those advances? And on balance, human society has massively progressed with the advent of technology in one discipline after another. Now, with every technology shift, there are societal issues that need to be grappled with and dealt with. If you go back to the Luddites with the Industrial Revolution, I mean, people are impacted as well by technology, and so leaders have an obligation to think about how to navigate and manage that. But on balance, when I look forward and say, what does modern technology promise us? Well, in an era where, let's say in the Western Hemisphere, there's huge aging that's happening. A very big proportion of, in China, I think, I'm trying to remember the numbers, something like for every 18 employees, there's one retiree today. In 2050, that's 2.3 to 1. Those shifts are drastic. Without things like AI to help manage, and robotics and care robots and so on, society is going to be much harder as the population in general ages. With 5G networks at the edge, allowing you to do some of the low latency things that Will was talking about, you're going to see massive advances in medical treatment, in surgeons actually operating on people and actually seeing what they're doing while they're doing it, which you don't have today. And so there are lots of amazing potential. That doesn't deny the fact that you have to think about which jobs are impacted, how will society be impacted, how do we want it to be impacted, and have the right kind of framework around the changes that we bring.
Is it fair to say that, with all these technological advancements, the people who are in the thick of it, both creating the technology, commercializing the technology, are generally pretty slow to see the downside, and then they end up being very reactive. So, I feel like it was, relatively speaking, 10 minutes ago that I had my first conversation about the addictive nature of smartphones. We had them for years and years, and then boom, we're talking about the addiction. Fair, or do you think that's just sort of negative thinking?
I'll tell you what, I think about it a little bit differently. So I've got a friend of mine who works in one of the intelligence agencies in the UK, and dealing with like the ugliest stuff that humanity has to serve up. And I asked him a question. I said, doesn't it make you feel miserable that you're dealing with all this horrible stuff the whole time? And he said, actually, no. And the reason, because actually the percentage of people who are really bad is very small. He estimates 2%. We reflect our technology. Our technology is designed by us. So with the stuff that we don't like, I mean, it's coming from people. So, you know, if you're being hacked on the web, there's a person behind the hack. So the question is, given that it reflects us, you know, how do we make sure it reflects the good side of us and mitigate the other effects? So by and large, I think the folks who get obsessed with tuning algorithms to make your kid want to buy more V-Bucks on Fortnite, I mean, they're pursuing a profit motive because that's what the company is meant to do. You know, people on the front end of genetic research are trying to crack problems that no one's ever cracked before. That's exciting. But society still has an obligation to put the right framework around that. And I think that's not new. That's as it ever was.
I'm gonna come to you all in just a few minutes for your questions. Do you want to add anything to that?
I'm an optimist. I'm a tech optimist, a tech enthusiast, looking at it from how it's going to change communities, that humans are the reason why the ghetto is the ghetto. If not, AI didn't do that.
Yeah.
Right? The zoning and why a kid gets $5,000 for their education in the hood versus $10,000 in Beverly Hills. Humans did that. Why there's a liquor store, check cashing, a motel, and a strip club down the street from the elementary school. Humans made it okay for some neighborhoods to have that and other neighborhoods not. But the optimism, the reason why I'm so optimistic is if we have neglected kids in areas, how do you get the best education for everybody? Teachers that understand each student, right? There's a limitation on a teacher direct to 1,000 kids in the hood. AI in the loop could take a teacher and make her a super teacher, or make him a super teacher. AI in the loop. But AI on its own, you still need a human in the loop. We should always make sure that there's a human in the loop. And so that's the reason why I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because I believe in humanity, although we have our setbacks and our shortfallings and how we are, deal with equality. I still believe in humanity. And I hope that regulations come because right now there aren't. Yesterday I heard a term that I never heard before. And that is we are SRO, a self-regulated organization. A company dealing with AI. I'm like, wait a second, you're an SRO. Who gave you that term? Well, we did because, we're morally, we got our North Star there. I was like, wow, because there are no regulations, people are, claiming that they are SRO. That goes to show you the problems. We're kind of in the wild, wild west, which is great because you don't want over-regulations with innovation, but there needs to be some parameters, how people are to deploy these technologies that are going to shake up the world.